Communism is a failed system, universally failed system. And I don't see socialism as a very useful substitute, but that's another story.
DHS is working with our partners to support the Haitian and Cuban people. The Coast Guard, along with our state, local, and federal partners, are monitoring any activity that may indicate increases in unsafe and irregular maritime migration in the Florida Straits, including unpermitted vessel departures from Florida to Cuba. The time is never right to attempt migration by sea. To those who risk their lives doing so, this risk is not worth taking. Allow me to be clear. If you take to the sea, you will not come to the United States.
There's every indication that yesterday's protests were spontaneous expressions of people who are exhausted with the Cuban government's economic mismanagement and repression. And these are protests inspired by the harsh reality of everyday life in Cuba, not people in another country. I'm saying that because I think there have been a range of accusations out there, as you well know, Jeff. In terms of our assessment of a future, our policy, I should say, it continues to be, our approach continues to be governed by two principles. First, support for democracy and human rights, which is going to continue to be at the core of our efforts through empowering the Cuban people to determine their own future. Second, Americans, especially Cuban Americans, are the best ambassadors for freedom and prosperity in Cuba. I don't have anything to predict for you in terms of any policy shift. Obviously, given the protests were just happening over the last 24 to 48 hours, we're assessing how we can be helpful directly to the people of Cuba.
Do you think that people are leaving Cuba because they don't like communism?
I think we've been pretty clear that we think people are leaving Cuba, or not leaving Cuba, or protesting in the streets all as well, because they are opposed to the oppression, to the mismanagement of the government in the country.
That was White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Now look at that. That is current video. It's happening in Cuba, in Havana right now. Protesters being beaten up in the street. There is a report of one death among the protesters. That's pretty brutal stuff. Here is the great senator from the great state of Texas, the son of a Cuban immigrant, Senator Ted Cruz. What should the White House be doing here, Senator?
Well, first of all, they ought to speak the truth. I mean, that really is pitiful what you just played there. No, the people protesting in the streets in Cuba are not protesting mismanagement. If you listen to what they're chanting, they're not chanting manage better. They're chanting libertad. They're chanting freedom. They're chanting down with the dictatorship. And for whatever reason, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are unwilling to speak plainly and to say the communist dictatorship in Cuba is evil. They are murdering people, they are torturing people, they are oppressing people, and the Cuban people yearn to be free. And I gotta say, Stuart, it really is powerful to see that those protesters, as they walk down the streets of Havana, they're waving American flags. It's the same thing the protesters in Hong Kong were waving, because the American flag across the globe is a symbol of freedom, and the American leadership ought to be standing with those who are oppressed and standing up for freedom.
How is it that our Secretary of Homeland Security can say, no, Cubans, you try to sail over here, you're out, but the southern border is still wide open? How is this possible?
Well, it's rampant hypocrisy. The southern border, the Biden administration, there is an ongoing crisis. We're on pace for over 2 million people to come to this country illegally, and they are simply doing catch and release on the southern border. You know, it's amazing, Stuart. The only immigrants apparently on planet Earth that Joe Biden doesn't want coming to America are Cubans, and I kind of suspect it has something to do with the fact that a lot of Cubans vote Republican, and he's decided, okay, now we have a crisis. We can't have any of those potential Republican voters come. And it really is unfortunate. I think it's this administration's reluctance to call out a communist dictator and reluctance to acknowledge that Cuba is a socialist country that is oppressive and that has produced misery and suffering. And now in the Democratic Party, we have a number of American socialists that are open socialists that are arguing America should have the same socialist economy that Cuba has, that Venezuela has, and they don't want to admit the miserable failure that socialist dictatorships have produced.
Well, should we intervene? And if you think we should intervene, how should we intervene?
So I don't think we should intervene in terms of sending in the Marines. It's not our job to send in our sons and daughters into harm's way, but I think there's incredible power to speaking up and using the bully pulpit of the presidency. You know, Stuart, if you come to my office in the Senate, the main feature in the office is a gigantic painting of Ronald Reagan standing in front of the Brandenburg Gate saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." That leadership is powerful, and you know it is the leadership right now that is completely absent from Joe Biden and from Kamala Harris.